In 1999, construction workers in a demolished London hospital found a sealed letter from 1932 predicting the building's structural collapse, with the engineer's warning never sent because his secretary filed it under completed inspections. That unread page sat in a wall cavity for 67 years while the building stood, cracked, and finally fell. These are 8 messages that arrived too late to matter, each one tracing back to a single small decision that sealed their fate. Every lost message is a door that never opened. Today we follow 8 of them, some famous, others buried in archives, united by one thread. Each contained exactly what someone needed to hear, and each was stopped by a decision so ordinary it barely registered at the time. A drawer left locked, a ship sailed early, a telegram marked not urgent. We'll meet a warning about a dam that arrived the morning after it broke, and a love letter that crossed an ocean only to find a widow. But first, a bottle thrown into the North Sea in 1914 that a fisherman finally pulled up in 2006. The message inside was perfectly legible. The recipient had been dead for 92 years. Private Thomas Hughes of the Durham Light Infantry was bored. It was September the 9th, 1914, and his ship, the HMS Scheherazade, was ferrying troops to France. Hughes bought a ginger beer bottle from the canteen, drank it empty, and wrote a note to his wife, Elizabeth. He sealed it with a cork and pitched it overboard, asking whoever found it to write to her at 147 Beck Road, Hackney. The bottle drifted in North Sea currents for decades, finally washing up on the Essex coast in December 2006. A retired postal worker named Steve Gowan found it while beachcombing. He did his research. Elizabeth Hughes had died in 1979, 30 years before her husband's message reached dry land. She never knew about the bottle. Hughes himself had survived the war, lived to 70, died in 1972. The small decision, he never told her he'd thrown it. She never thought to watch the waves. 2 ordinary silences separated by 92 years of tides. William Mulholland built the St. Francis Dam himself and couldn't sleep the night before it failed. On March 12, 1928, he sent his assistant, Harvey Van Norman, to inspect a new crack in the concrete face. Van Norman telephoned at 11:30 p.m. The crack hadn't moved. Mulholland went to bed. At 11:57 p.m., the dam keeper, Tony Harnischfeger, walked the crest with a lantern and saw something else. Water seeping through the abutment. He sent a telegram to the power station downstream. The night operator, a man named Ray Rising, read it at 12:03 a.m. He decided to wait for the morning supervisor rather than wake the town. The dam collapsed at 12:03 a.m. 12 billion gallons followed the Santa Clara River Valley to the sea. Rising's telegram, found in his desk drawer 3 days later, contained the words "leak in west abutment," sent to a man who never woke. The small decision, 12 minutes, seemed too short to matter. They were exactly enough. German embassy in Washington placed a warning in 50 American newspapers on May 1, 1915. Travelers sailing on British ships through the war zone did so at their own risk. The notice ran directly beside Cunard's advertisement for the Lusitania's departure on May 1st. Alfred Vanderbilt, the railway heir, saw it. He sailed anyway, but the message that matters came from British naval intelligence. Room 40 had decrypted German signals indicating U-boat activity off the Irish coast. The Admiralty sent a general warning to all ships on May 6th. It never reached the Lusitania. Captain William Turner had reduced speed to save coal and was navigating by sight rather than zigzagging. At 1:20 p.m. on May 7th, a U-20 torpedo struck. The ship sank in 18 minutes. The specific failure? Liverpool's postal system. The warning telegram had been delivered to the Cunard office at 11:00 a.m. on May 6th. A clerk named John McCune filed it under routine traffic and went to lunch. It was still there when word came that the Lusitania was gone. The LZ-139 Hindenburg made 10 successful crossings in 1936. For its 1937 season, the Germans added a new feature, a lighter-than-air postal station, where passengers could mail letters from the airship itself. On its final flight, May 3, 1937, the Hindenburg carried 17,000 pieces of mail. When it burst into flames at Lakehurst, New Jersey that evening, postal workers rushed into the inferno to salvage what they could. They recovered 176 charred letters. One envelope, addressed to a Mrs. Ernst Udet in Berlin, contained a photograph and a brief note from a passenger named Josef Speer. He had mailed it during the flight, hours before landing. The letter described beautiful weather, good company, and his anticipation of arrival. It was postmarked on board LZ-129 and stamped with the airship's official seal. The small decision. Speer had considered waiting to mail it from New York, where the stamps would be more collectible. Instead, he used the onboard service. The letter survived because it left his hands. Speer survived by jumping from a burning window. 35 others did not. History, as ever, was not finished with them. The recovered letters became evidence in the disaster investigation, their postmark times helping establish the fire's spread. You know the icebergs. What you may not know is that the SS Californian, a freighter stopped in ice 8 miles north of the Titanic, sent multiple warnings that evening. At 6:30 p.m., Cyril Evans, the Californian's wireless operator, tried to inform the Titanic's operator, Jack Phillips, that his ship was stopped and surrounded. Phillips was busy relaying passenger messages to Cape Race. He interrupted Evans. Shut up, I'm busy." At 11 o'clock p.m., Evans turned off his set and went to bed. The Titanic struck ice at 11:40, but the message that could have changed everything came earlier. At 9 o'clock p.m., Captain Stanley, Lord of the Californian, ordered his crew to signal the Titanic by Morse lamp. They flashed ice ahead 3 times. The Titanic's officers saw the lights but never responded. Captain Smith was at dinner, and the officer on watch, Herbert Stone, assumed the Californian was a different ship. The small decision, Stone never thought to wake his captain for a closer look. 8 miles, visible lights, silence. In September 1929, Roger Babson, a financial analyst, gave a speech in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific. He was ridiculed, but he also wrote. Babson sent personal letters to 50 industrial leaders, warning them to reduce debt and build cash reserves. One recipient was Samuel Insull, the utilities magnate building an empire on leverage. Insull's secretary, a woman named Mabel, filed the letter unopened. She had instructions to screen her employer's mail for crank predictions. Babson's warning sat in a cabinet through October 1929 while Insull's holding company collapsed. The letter was found during bankruptcy proceedings in 1932, still sealed. The glue untouched. Insull fled to Europe, died in debt. The small decision, Mabel's judgment of what deserved her employer's attention. She had served him faithfully for 15 years. Her loyalty was the trap. Aberfan, Wales, October 21, 1966. A coal waste tip collapsed onto a primary school, killing 116 children and 28 adults. For years, villagers had warned the National Coal Board about the tip's instability. But 6 months before the disaster, a specific letter arrived. On April 10, 1966, a local councillor named Gwyneth Williams wrote to the Merthyr Tydfil Borough Council's engineer, copied to the coal board. "The tip has moved, and I am sure it will move again unless something is done." The engineer, a man named Robbins, read it and made a decision. He did not forward it to the coal board's area manager. He did not visit the site. He filed it with other correspondents and took early retirement in September. The tip collapsed 5 weeks later. Robbins's letter was found in his desk during the official inquiry. He testified that he had no recollection of receiving it. The small decision, one man's sense of what required escalation, his personal threshold for alarm. He lived 40 more years. The children he might have saved did not. Imagine finding a letter written to you by someone who died before you were born. That is what happened to a woman named Emily in 2008, when renovation work in her Vermont farmhouse uncovered a message from 1829, one that named her exact address and described the writer's certainty that someone would read these words in a distant future. The letter was addressed simply to whoever finds this. Emily was the whoever. But this is not that story. This is the story of a message so precisely delayed it seems engineered by time itself. A letter that crossed an ocean to find a widow on the exact anniversary of her husband's death, though he had written it believing she would read it in weeks. The small decision that made it possible. A postal clerk in Marseille who spoke no English, who filed an international letter under undeliverable because he could not decipher the address, and who kept it in his desk for 51 years until his own death, when his heirs found it and finally sent it on. Jacob Emerson sailed from Massachusetts to Marseille in 1912 to establish a trading business. His wife, Catherine, was to follow once he arranged their home. He wrote every week. In March 1913, Catherine received word that Jacob had died of typhoid. She grieved, remarried in 1918, became a widow again in 1945, and lived quietly until her own death in 1964. Jacob's letters had stopped with his death, except one. In 1956, Catherine received an envelope postmarked Marseille, 1913. Inside was Jacob's final letter, written days before his fever. He described their new house, the garden he was planting, his certainty that she would love the light. The letter had reached the Marseille post office in April 1913. The clerk on duty, Pierre Duval, could not read the English address. He filed it under undeliverable foreign. Duval kept the letter in his desk. He moved offices, kept it. He retired in 1947, took it home. When Duval died in 1956, his daughter found it and, with a dictionary, deciphered enough to send it to Massachusetts. Catherine was 63. She had last seen Jacob at 22. Imagine reading your beloved's voice from 43 years ago, believing him in the ground, and finding him suddenly alive in your hands, describing a garden that never grew. She wrote on the envelope, "Received 1956. He died 1913. I have kept him now twice." These messages share a geometry, intention bent by circumstance, meaning delayed until it became something else. Warning become elegy, love become archaeology. The systems we build to connect us are fragile: a clerk's lunch, an engineer's retirement, a wireless operator's fatigue. The lesson is not that we should read every letter instantly. It is that we cannot know which ordinary decision will outlast us, which small choice will be examined by strangers and found wanting. Today, Catherine's envelope sits in a Massachusetts historical society. The letter inside is still legible. The garden Jacob described was built over in the 1970s. Nothing remains of what he hoped she would see. Which message of yours sits unread in someone's drawer? Which warning did you file for later? Let me know in the comments which of these found voices stayed with you, and if you've ever discovered something meant for another time, tell that story below. Until next time, keep watching the waves.